I didn't think I'd have to go back to birth, but I was born July 11th, 1942 at St. Elizabeth's Hospital in Youngstown, Ohio. Born to, my mom's name was Margaret Mary, my dad's name is Michael Joseph, both very Catholic names. I always wanted to be a nurse. No, I don't think it came from birth. It might have been genetic influence, because the two people in my family that definitely influenced me was my father. I think we're a little loud. Better? Okay. Were my father, who was very good at first aid. He worked in the steel industry, so he had plenty of time to use it on all of his peers as well as on me, because as you could imagine, I was a very active child. The second person that was very influential was my grandmother, my dad's mom, who I didn't know until I was getting confirmed had delivered over half of my confirmation class as a nurse midwife. She did help me one time. I decided I was going in one direction and my mom wanted me to come in another, and my shoulder got dislocated. I don't know how my grandmother got there, but she did and put it back in place in 2 seconds. So I was very influenced and decided that a nurse is definitely who I wanted to be. This is a marketing photo that was done by a paper in Niles, Ohio, because my parents and I were the first family to move into a new subdivision. And I thought it was worth sharing with you. My mom was always a stay-at-home mom, and she was an excellent one at that. My dad worked in the steel industry, and he was a lithographer, which meant he painted on steel. And I don't know how many of you remember the mobile signs and the Pepsi-Cola signs on the barrels? He did that. Well, we lived in Niles, Ohio. My dad was 13th in the family, so we had a very large family, and as the first granddaughter on his side, I could do no ill. My mom was the second on her side, and I was the oldest, so anytime any of the grandkids got in trouble, it was Pat. So it was very dichotomous, but it was an interesting change. Family-wise, we had a lot of family gatherings from the time that I moved in here. I was 4 until I moved to New Jersey, because my dad got a promotion with U.S. Steel. And the U.S. Steel plant was at Palmyra, New Jersey, for any of you who are familiar with Palmyra. And we chose to live in Haddonfield. Now we're going to do a little fly jump. We call it a hop in the Air Force. So we're going kind of from childhood to Abington Memorial Hospital. Now, I attended, obviously, Abington High School. And when I was in high school, I followed my interest in nursing and did a research paper on no one else but Florence Nightingale, for those of you in the audience that are nurses. And in my junior year, I said, okay, this is what I'm going to do. I want to be in a diploma program. I'm going for 3 years of nursing. None of this bachelor's has just started. I want to have the best clinical experience ever. And when I interviewed at Abington, which is outside of Northeast Philadelphia, near Willow Grove Naval Air Station, anybody that's in that area, because of the location, we had access to all the residents, interns, med students imaginable from all the medical schools in Philadelphia. So I learned teamwork and healthcare very early on, and I had a wonderful, wonderful time in that nursing school. These are pictures that are in different orders, but I can make sense out of them, so just bear with me. How many nurses do I have here? Just one? Anne? I can't believe it. Okay. Well, anyway, there's a rationale here behind these uniforms and et cetera, nursing paraphernalia. The first picture on the far left is of myself, obviously giving a back rub, and I am old-fashioned enough, I still believe that a back rub is essential to inpatient care. And it's been replaced by computers, and I'm very sorry about that. You'll notice that I just have on a blue and white striped uniform. That's because I was a plebe. It was my first year. In May of my first year, we got capped. And you'll notice in addition to the capping, we get this white bib. And then the top one is the whole thing together. So it's the blue stripes, the bib, the cap, and the cape. And the building behind that is my dorm. That's where I lived. And it's very conveniently located out of the emergency room from the hospital. And what you'll find is that we used to sneak out a lot at night, and we had a curfew, and we had a plan about how we got in without getting caught. Next photo, obviously, is graduation. So from 1960 to 1963, I spent in the program and attended Penn State for my prerequisites and was happy to graduate. I had attended classes at the University of Pennsylvania once I got out of school, and my first job was at Our Lady of Lourdes Hospital in Camden, New Jersey, where I worked on a very busy surgical floor, and what you need to know is there was no ICU and no recovery room. Inner city hospital, very busy, covered the whole gamut. So I only worked there for a few months, and they had nursing students on the floor. Well, I didn't know, I guess I impressed the School of Nursing dean, because Sister John Francis approached me one day and said, how would you like to come work for me as a clinical instructor? So she was my first mentor, introduced me to education, and I was a happy camper because I didn't have to rotate shifts anymore. I could do days and go to school and have a normal life. The picture here is taken the day of my commissioning. I was in school at the University of Pennsylvania with 33 Air Force nurses, and they sort of adopted me, and I ended up adopting them because they were seasoned. They hadn't been in school in years, and we had a pathophysiology teacher that started at one end of the room and go all the way down there and then just keep going. And so they were lost. I tried to help them with that, and they had the most trouble with French. So when they found out that the Air Force was going to have a program where they sponsored a civilian nurse for 1 year, their last year, for their Bachelor of Science in Nursing, they were after me to apply. Well, it's sort of like, Uncle Sam wants you now. So I decided to apply, and I got selected. So that was my big first. And in addition to having my tuition and my books paid, I got a first lieutenant salary for a year. So I was a happy camper. And the picture on the far left is of me in the light blue Air Force uniform when it was nice weather prior to graduation in December. After graduation, my first assignment was at Shepherd Air Force Base, at Air Training Command Base, for orientation to basic military medical education. And that covered the whole gamut. Besides boring classes, we had survival, we learned the customs and courtesies, we learned how to salute, we learned how to march, we had a graduation parade, and we had a dining in. After training, my first assignment was at Shepherd Hospital, and I was assigned to a medical unit. So for me, who liked surgery and everything fast, this was really an adjustment, but it turned out to be a good adjustment. Okay, besides work, we did have some fun times. Briefly, the upper left was me serving tea for the 19th Air Force Nurse Corps anniversary for the community. Up down here was where I needed the rest of those dancers from Valentine's Day to come help. We had a TGIF party, and a group of us were dancing, and I picked this one because the other ones were a little X-rated. So that's my being promoted to captain by the hospital commander and the chief nurse. Now, when I was at Shepherd, just for a short while, mind you, we're in the Vietnam War. I got orders for the 57th Aerovac Squadron out of Clark, which meant that I would be flying Vietnam vets from Vietnam, Clark, to the West Coast, to Andrews. Well, I was really surprised because I hadn't been to flight school yet, so I couldn't be an Aerovac nurse without graduating from flight school. Well, a few weeks after that, guess what? I got orders for flight school. Flight school is a 6-week course at Brooks Air Force Base in San Antonio now. It's located at Wright-Patterson. And while there, you ended up being tri-qualified. You'd be able to be a flight nurse in a C-141, and the C-130, and the C-9. The C-141 is a huge, wonderful plane that I love. Spent a lot of hours on it. It shows you a medical technician inside, and I'll spend a little bit more time about the aircraft in a bit. And the bottom one, you can see the wingspan. You know, when I stand underneath it, I can't reach it. So it's a huge aircraft. The C9 was like the Cadillac. It came up inside the aircraft. It's like your C9, your DC-9s. You know, everything's finished. The cargo planes, the insides are not finished. And they flew in Navy flight suits. We flew in Navy Air Force uniforms, or in the reserves we flew in the old green flight suits. And you can see on the inside, I'm sorry we couldn't get this picture bigger, but that area that has this cape around it, it's an isolation area in the DC-9, C9. While at flight school, we had several interesting experiences. Besides the classroom that addressed issues such as effects on your body when you're at altitude, which is very important, we also had an experience with the hyperbaric chamber whereby we were observing other people's reaction to oxygen deprivation at altitude. And when they tell you during the briefing, grab your mask first before you do anything with the babies, it's very important. And then we'd have a debriefing where everybody went over their symptoms because they were all different. We also had a ditching exercise, and if people did not swim well, that was a real traumatic experience. We literally had to jump out of the plane into the water. We had to save one of our peers, and then we had to get that peer and ourselves into the raft. And if you couldn't do that, you didn't pass flight school. So it could be pretty challenging for some of us. The graduation, I graduated in 68 and was a proud camper, went and was assigned to the 58th Air Evacuation Squadron, I apologize. It was part of Military Airlift Command, which was stationed out of Scott. This was a new organization that was implemented because the 2nd Air Evac group in Germany that were flying in propellers needed jet planes to do the long-range missions. And so the C-141 aircraft was used with the 58th Squadron. And even though I never did fly out of Clark, I'm here to tell you that we had 2 missions a week to what we call CONUS, or America. And it went from Rhein-Main, which is near Frankfurt, to Andrews Air Force Base in DC, and to McGuire Air Force Base in New Jersey. And when the 57th mission from out west came to Andrews the same time as we did, we took care of all the patients that were on the 57th mission with ours. So that was my experience in air evacuation of Vietnam vets. In addition to the 2 flights that go to the States, which had a crew of 2 flight nurses, 1 medical crew director and 1 medical nurse, and 3 medical technicians, as I said, we wore regular blue uniforms, and we had a downrange mission. Well, downrange, we wore civilian clothes because the countries did not want us there in a military uniform. The downrange mission went from Rhein-Main to Incirlik Air Base, Turkey, to Asmara, Ethiopia, and to Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. Now, the highlight of the Asmara, Ethiopia visit was where I saw the Jackson 5, and I didn't. You need to know, when you're overseas for 4 years, you don't know anything about the Jackson 5 until you come home. Anyway, that was one highlight. And then another mission that I promised I would tell some people about was when we were just on a routine trip to Turkey, and we're getting ready to land, and the pilot calls me up to the cockpit and says, "There are 500 rioters, and they have bombs and guns, and they're on the flight line, and they don't want us to land." Well, I had patients in an airplane, and we were going to pick up patients there, and I said, "What could we do?" And so we negotiated, and we decided that if we could do a landing and get the patients enplaned and deplaned in 10 minutes, the Turks were going to let us go. If we extended a minute, they were going to bomb the plane. And so we were very happy that all of us were able to do that, and I was the only one, lucky me, that could be at the door so that they could see me enplaning and deplaning the patients. So it was a little bit challenging. But things like that happen sometimes when you're flying into other people's foreign countries. So even though things are routine, they really never are. Okay, so I started to tell you about the stateside trips, and I told you about the downrange, and I'll go into a little bit more exciting things about that and some urgents that we did. Okay, on the C-141, all the patients are enplaned and deplaned through the rear cargo door. And I'll show you, there's an ambulance there, but I'll show you in a bit with the fire truck how it's real obvious what happens. Now, our procedures out of Rhine-Main were the day before the stateside missions. We visited both Wiesbaden Air Force Hospital as well as Landstuhl Hospital. And we briefed all the patients and all the patients' attendants that would be on that plane that day. The patients, we got all their medications, we got all the information for any treatments, whatever they require that day. The medical crew director went home and did a load plan. And this is an example of a load plan. So every patient, every attendant had either a seat number or a place in the rear of the plane where the litters were located. And that medical crew director gave that load plan copy to the medicine nurse, and she poured all the medicines, and everything was ready for the flight the next day. Believe it or not, that is me way in the back. And I think it's interesting for you to know. Remember I told you that on a C-141 and a C-130, there is absolutely no padding. You know, these are the troop seats that when the planes are full of troops, they're just sitting on these red seats ready to go to war. In the rear of the aircraft, that's where the litter stanchions will be. And you'll have as many stanchions as you need litter patients. So a lot of these ambulatory seats would be removed and another stanchion would be put up from whence the litter straps would be. The center aisle, on both sides of the stanchions, you could take 3 patients in a row, and if you really, really need to, you could do 4. On the sides, you can only take 2. Seat-wise, the medical crew director will be in the front row on the right aisle seat. Her chief medical technician will be across the aisle from her. The medicine nurse will be in the middle, and she'll be on the left side on the aisle, and her tech will be opposite her. And there's a reason for that, because the C-141 is very noisy. We don't have any communication devices. So if I were in my seat and I needed to communicate to that med nurse, I had a code, and she knew what the code meant. And the same with the med tech. The last med tech sat in the rear of the plane, absolute last row, in front of what we call the latrine or the galley. And because of this aircraft was always visible to all the crew. Anything that went on, we knew what went on. You'll see that the seats, instead of facing forward, the passenger seats are facing rearward, and that's because of safety features in case of a rapid decompression, emergency landing, or a ditching. In contrast, the litter patients will be facing you, and for safety in case of any of those adverse events. Oh, I'm supposed to remember to tell you. The medical crew director on any flight is the boss. If I, on this flight, communicated with the pilot that we had to land and divert because of a change in patient condition, it would be done. There's no question. There's no question. You're the boss. Okay, remember I told you that I would show you one where you could see the bus actually drive up to the rear of the 141. This makes it a lot easier for you to understand, I think. A fire truck must be on the flight line when an air evac plane lands or takes off for enplaning and deplaning. And I threw this in just for a Merry Christmas thing, jollies, I guess. But the other reason is it gives you a little bit better view of what I mean when I talk about the litters on the bulkhead. And this was always my favorite place to put seriously ill patients because it was easy for me, 2 steps from my seat, to get there, take care of the person, and I had room. Now, if you have a striker frame, you either use the bulkhead or you're going to use the center aisle because of smoothness and safety. Okay. We went through the routine missions, and the one thing I did want to add was when I lived in Germany, I spent more time at home because I lived in Haddonfield, New Jersey, and the plane ended at McGuire, and so we had crew rest, and my dad came pick me up, and so I was able to sleep for 12 hours and come back and do the return flight, which left McGuire, landed at Lodges, and then or Iceland, and went back to Rhine-Main. So I brought my parents' treasures, and I took treasures from home back for everybody when I was on Arabic. This is a picture of Ethiopia. One of the times that we were in Ethiopia, and I'll try to make this quick, we had a lot of nurses in training, particularly because this was Vietnam and we were training a lot of reservists to be able to backfill active duty. Well, we go out usually when we're in a foreign country with the buddy system. And if you can and there's enough guys, it's a guy and a girl. If you can't, then you just partner up however you can. Well, this girl decided she was going to take her wallet out and give some money to one little poor boy. We had a riot. You won't believe it. All of us were running in different directions, going through buildings, anything just to get away, to get back to the hotel out of safety, because there were so many people that were starving and they thought that we had a lot of money. On another one of the downrange trips, the C-141 occasionally, well, pretty often sometimes, would break down and have maintenance problems. Well, on this one, I just happened to be lucky enough to have a very good med tech, but we had all this equipment, so we made reservations on the Ethiopian Airlines. I had a striker frame, I had oxygen, I had my medicine, and we managed to get everything there on the plane. And I was talking to my tech, and all of a sudden I said to him, you haven't gotten a briefing, have we? And he said, no, and we just took off straight up in the air. I kid you not. No briefing, no seat belts, nothing. And then we found out that there were goats on the plane. And besides the goats, we had a lot of nomads that didn't smell real good. So needless to say, neither of us ate anything until we got to an American base, and then we resumed our ordinary mission. This is a sample of a striker frame, and I apologize, it's the only one I could get. Otherwise, I was going to be telling you it's like a sandwich. You know, you have the baseline, you put the person in, you have the top, and then you secure them. But the value of striker frames is that you can turn the patient, keep them in proper alignment, and it's wonderful if you have severe burns or if you have anybody that has spinal cord injury. And one of my urgent missions actually was involved getting a patient who was a young Army sergeant. Most of our urgents involved active duty or their dependents, Peace Corps workers or embassy workers and their dependents. There were a lot of motor vehicle accidents and there were a lot of burns. So this one young man had a motorcycle accident, and the natives were very good. They found a board and they put him on a board and they kept him in alignment, and he remained on the board until we came to pick him up. So the challenge for us in flight was not about alignment and turning. It was that his whole posterior was full of splinters. Yeah, so we had to gradually try to treat the removal of the splinters. Okay, for the 4 years that I was on active duty, I started as a flight nurse, I became a flight nurse instructor, and then a flight nurse examiner. I was in charge of training, and I was in charge of standardization evaluation, which is like the quality person on the unit. And I was very pleased to have those positions. The one thing that I need to tell you is that while I was flying across the United States and flying all over Asia, Europe, everywhere, Africa, I was enrolled in a master's program from Ball State University in counseling. So I graduated in '72 as my tour ended. No one should go to Germany without at least looking at Lederhosen in the Alps, and so that's my little cheer up, wake everybody up on the slides. This is the couple that I lived with, the German couple. I lived in a small town called Moorfelden, was right across the street from a Gaststätte, and that's where I ate a lot. And this couple had a bakery during the war, and you could still see the bombing evidence in their building. They lived on the first floor, I lived on the second. On the third floor was a young private and his wife and a new baby from Louisiana. So we were an integrated family overseas. My first assignment when I returned to the States was to San Antonio. And nobody can go to San Antonio without going to the Riverwalk. And of course, my parents wanted to do that too. I was assigned to the in-service education department at Wilford Hall Medical Center, which is the largest medical center in the Air Force. And my job was obviously to brief all the new personnel, provide continuing education for the nursing as well as the enlisted personnel, and help with their on-the-job training skill level so that they can get promoted. The group at the top, one weekend, we were given a old barracks, and one weekend we went over there, we cleaned that barracks up, we painted it all up, we filled it up with beds and all kinds of medical equipment so that our enlisted personnel could have a place to train, and we have community programs that were coming that could also use it. And that was, SANYO was one of the community programs, San Antonio Neighborhood Youth Organization. In conjunction with St. Philip's College, these students would do their clinical where we were. So we had the practice lab and we had the actual patients and they graduated with a nurse's aide certificate. So they were very proud, and they came from the west side and the south side, which was primarily Hispanic. All my exes live in Texas. You've all heard that from Willie Nelson. You can't go to Texas without going and dancing with a real cowboy who does a good job with the two-step. Okay, I separated as a regular officer in the spring of 1985 because when I got my psychology degree overseas, I decided I wanted to be a psychologist. And I knew the Air Force wasn't going to send a nurse to be a psychologist because they were sending nurses to get their bachelor's. So I joined the faculty at San Antonio College and taught in their associate degree program as an associate professor, med-surg psych, and I got selected by Target 90 Goals for San Antonio to be the school business partnership coordinator. Henry Cisneros was the mayor there, and he had a lot of plans to help San Antonio. Like all cities, the south and the west side was less affluent than the north, east, and west side. And so what I did was I went to all the schools and found out what their needs were, and then I matched them up with a business partner, and it was actually really very rewarding. So the schools got either material that they needed, or they got tutoring or whatever. And I love this slide because this young man was interested in the arts, and you could see he's not shy at all. Okay, when I separated from the Air Force, worked at San Antonio College, I joined the active reserve unit at Kelly called the 34th. And this unit actually got activated during Vietnam and a lot of the conflict. Excuse me. But when we do training in the reserves, it's simulated training. You and your peers are patients. And so with my knowledge of Wilford Hall, I arranged it so that I could take the med techs over there and give them some real patient experiences, so when they did get activated, their skill levels would be better. Every year you go on an annual one-week training exercise. It was always somewhere where it was hot and dusty. This one year it was Colorado, and what you do is you land in a C-130, you bring all your gear, you put the tent up, you make sure that you have latrine and water facilities to drink and to shower, and of course we were on MREs. The C-130 is similar to the C-141 in that the loading is always from the rear. The C-130 is different from the C-141 in that you could do touch and go landings on a very short landing field with the C-130. Hot unloads were not uncommon. C-141 needs a long flight line. And you can see that they're getting ready to take patients off. And nurses and techs carried the litters. The the nurse that was in charge assessed the patient as a triage nurse, decided what kind of care they needed, and they went in the tent for the appropriate care, and then there's me with some of the techs providing care in the tent. Okay, so our week's over. We're loading up to leave, take off, and go home. While I was with the 34th, I was sent TDY temporary duty to Alaska for a month in order to train reserve nurses and med techs from Travis on the 130 so that they could be qualified. And so I trained them and gave them a check ride. And in addition to being qualified on the 130, I oriented them as to how they could carry patients on aerovac on small planes. Because what actually happens in Alaska, which is very barren and lots of glaciers, in fact, we had to not land to save someone that was in a crash because there wasn't any place for us to go down. We had to call for choppers. And it is easy, believe it or not, to be able to put a litter in a 6 or 8 person plane. This was, when I was in Alaska, everything was daylight the whole time. I did a lot of running at night. I mean, you know, there was nobody on base except me running around in the daylight. And I chose these pictures just kind of like as an overview, but the one here on the bottom on the right, that's the way they buried their dead. Everybody that had some sort of talent or whatever it was. If you were a fisherman, you would have had a fish in a fishing pole. If you were a hunter, you would have had a gun and some kind of animal. And I thought that was interesting. I didn't know anybody buried people above ground except in New Orleans. So. And the one next to it is hard for you to see, but I met more international people at this birdhouse bar because anybody that went to Elmendorf had to go there. And the reason is because inside the bar was all women's underwear. You know, yeah. Signed, you know, from everywhere. So I had a couple drinks with somebody from Australia. It was interesting. Okay, so the whole time that I worked at San Antonio College and did the reserve duty, I was taking night classes at the University of Texas for my master's in psych nursing and my PhD in education. And I couldn't do it without having the tower from University of Texas at Austin. The tower is turned orange at the top when you graduate and when you win a football game. So I don't know what has more prestige. Here I am getting my diploma. The PhD diploma I had to get from the registrar later. And my dad had to do a hook 'em horns. These are my parents. And my Honda hatchback died from commuting from San Antonio to Austin. So my present to myself was a 300ZX maroon inside. And there's a Yorkie. I was a Yorkie owner before my Havanese. And here's the puppy who loves to take rides in the evening. Texas has gorgeous sunsets because it's so flat. And so the neatest thing in the world was after work, put the puppy in the car and go take a ride and see this gorgeous sunset and then come home and do whatever. Okay, after I graduated, I went to James Madison University in Harrisonburg, Virginia, and was faculty in the BSM program and taught the usual med-surg, psych, research. And then I was selected to teach a freshman seminar, which was an orientation to the liberal arts college because the students were spending too much time, they had too many 5-year students. They wanted them to understand what liberal arts was all about. And that was fun for me because I had an opportunity to be creative, and you won't believe the distance between immature and more mature freshmen. Of course, graduation is always a good thing, and having a little R&R in the Blue Ridge Mountains is a good thing. While I was at James Madison University, I was on faculty at the School of Aerospace Medicine and taught the flight nurse psych mental health content and redid the whole curriculum, updated it so that it had more focus on medical readiness. And because of the high incidence of PTSD, people needed to know how to deal with those patients. The other thing is, I'm so proud of myself because I went through being a regular officer, I went through being a reserve officer in a unit, and then when I was at JMU, I was an IMA, which is an individual mobilization augmentee. In other words, I could choose where I went. I spent time in the in-service education department at Langley in Virginia, and I worked at the Surgeon General's office at Bowling in DC in addition to teaching. And while I was at JMU, I was selected to do my presentation at the International Sigma Theta Tau Conference in Edinburgh, Scotland. And I had a little fun with a Scottish lad and a little R&R. There's a big difference between the technical support in America and the technical support in Scotland. So I had to be prepared to do my presentation in a much different way than I had planned, mainly because of the lack of support. But I'm going to be real brief about my moral judgment, and that was what my dissertation topic was: moral judgment of professional business managers out of San Antonio. So Lawrence Kohlberg is the one that set the standard for moral judgment testing. And what Carol Gilligan, who was his peer, said about him was, your standard is all male-oriented. Women do not approach moral dilemmas like men. And so she wrote a book in a different voice. And so I decided that I was going to do a dissertation in 2 phases where it was qualitative, involved interviewing. 1, I would test people using Kohlberg's instrument. And 2, I would do an open-ended interview where we actually did what was reported by the person as their most significant ethical dilemma and how they resolved it. And so that was really interesting. The findings were that all of the people scored high, according to Kohlberg, because they were educated and had work experience. Men definitely make their decision based upon rules. Women make their decision not only based upon rules, but the interpersonal connection aspect. And so I wasn't surprised about that, but I ended up reinforcing Carol Gilligan's theory, and I was happy. Okay, I told you that I was an IMA at Bowling Air Force Base in Washington, D.C. So this is another one of the firsts. The Surgeon General, activated me for 4 years to do a special program called the MedTech Associate Degree in Nursing Program. What was happening was our seasoned medical technicians who performed at a higher level than an LPN, when they retired, could not get a job higher than an aide and an orderly. And so that was shocking. So they said, Pat, I want you to go to headquarters ATC for 4 years and work up this program, and I did. So these are my 2 compadre buddies that helped when I was in the office. And I was only in the office in the beginning when I had to do all the research. I had to find a civilian program that had an accelerated LPN to ADN program, because our med techs they were motivated. They had the prerequisite courses done. We just needed to make sure that they could get out in a year and we could sponsor them. And so I researched all that, and then I did criteria for a selection board, and we did that. And then I had to develop an internship 1-year program when they got out where they were precepted, and that happened at MacDill, and everything went hunky-dory until they had a hurricane. But fortunately, my kids were okay, and they do call me Mama Ravella still. And we ended up having 20 medical technicians attend because of a very energetic General Paul K. Carlton, who was my #1 mentor. And he and I flew around to all of the bases at ATC in his plane. He's the pilot and me and the co-pilot. And we took a couple of enlisted personnel with us to try to sell the program. Some of the enlisted people didn't like the fact that certain med techs were going to be nurses. Some of the nurse corps officers didn't like the fact that med techs were going to be nurses and not bachelor's prepared nurses. So it was a job to be able to sell it. But thanks to General Carlton, his resourcefulness and creativity, it got accomplished. This is just a throw-in by Randolph Field with me and my aunt. Lewis Clark State College got selected as the school for the 20 to attend. It was a big publicity event, so on the left is the local recruiters. The picture on the right is of the dean in civilian clothes, and another one of my mentors, General Goodwin, who was the chief nurse of the Air Force, and of course myself. And this gentleman is the dean of the school. These are the proud graduates from the first class, and there they are in their blues. These are the graduates in the second class. And on the first and the second class, all of them did well in their preceptorship. All of them passed their nursing boards. And so the General Carlton decided that we would send them for their bachelor's if we could find a program that could do that in a year. And the University of Texas Medical Branch Galveston agreed to do it distance learning in a year because we had the excellent clinical facilities. We didn't need to use anything else at Wilford Hall. And that's the school rep with General Carlton and myself. How am I doing, boss?
You're doing great. You got about 15 minutes left.
How much?
It's 5:43.
Okay, we're doing good. So you'll notice that my hair is short here. At the end of my 4-year tour, I had a little bump in the road, as General Carlson said. I was diagnosed with breast cancer, had a lumpectomy, had radiation therapy, chose chemotherapy to decrease the chance of recidivism because I didn't have any positive nodes. And during that time, I still was working for him, and whenever he saw a new patient that was diagnosed with breast cancer, he called me and said, "Do you have time to see her?" And I said, "Of course." So I really got very much back into wanting to be in patient care. And so what I did was, this is just another cultural thing for some of the people that graduated. So what I did was I contacted the UTMB rep and said, "I've got nurses that are asking me for an FNP program, family nurse practitioner program, postmasters, so that it could be done distance learning here at Wilford Hall. What about it?" And they said, "We'll do it." And I decided, well, if I'm going to be in all these classes, I might as well do it. And so I did. And this is Ann and I at my graduation down in Galveston. I left Wilford Hall once I had my FMP, and my first job as an FMP was at the University of Maryland, Baltimore, as a faculty member, coordinated the program, worked at Open Gates, which is all-run nurse practitioner in a clinic clinic, and also worked in a lot of internal medicine, family practice, as well as integrative medicine while I was up there in Maryland. But if you want to know, what appeals to a nurse and always appeals to a nurse, it's the patients. And Forrest Gump said it the best way. He said, "Life's nothing but a box of chocolates." Well, for me, family practice is a box of chocolates. You never know what you're going to get. And that's why I love it so much. And here's a couple pictures of me with kids. And graduation is always good, regardless of the age of the student. And I'll try to wrap it up here a little bit. So, I moved to Bluffton about 2011, and after unpacking and doing all that stuff, I got a job at Cross Island Medical, family practice, urgent care, and I worked there until the past year. Ann and I moved here with Maya from Bluffton last April. And we're hoping that we'll develop as many wonderful friendships as we did all throughout my career and hers, because Ann is also an Air Force nurse. And we've been friends for 49, going on 50 years. Maya is now 15 months, and I couldn't believe that I could love a dog any more than I love my Yorkies, but this one has stolen my heart. So we're looking forward to having many positive memories here with you all at Tide Point, It's just a gorgeous place to live, and we love it, and we love Hilton Head. So thank you for your attention. If you have any questions, it's up to you.
I have one.
Yeah.
I was just wondering, how many striker frames or litters were you able to carry on a plane and handle on a flight?
You actually could do the whole aircraft with nothing but litters if it was necessary. Yeah.
So you took out all the seats?
The passenger seats would be removed.
I got you.
The bench seats would be there.
Okay.
And so the crew would be on the bench seats, but the whole aircraft could in fact be. It's a good question, Jerry. The crew and the whole aircraft could be configured that way.
Amazing.
And the Vietnam veteran, it was many times configured the whole plane.
Okay. Did you ever log your air hours or air miles?
I was afraid somebody might ask me that. Yeah, I've got thousands. I mean, my first year, my boss called me in and said, you know, how come you have so many hours? You have 1,000 hours. I said, well, you put me on the schedule for that, and we had urgents. I said, what did you want me to do? Yeah, I have really a lot. Anybody else? I hope I didn't go too fast or talk over your head or.
What aircraft are used now for medical evacuation?
C9s. And they also use the C-17s, but the reserves will still do the C-130s. The C-141s got out of commission. Yeah. Yeah.
What was your personal remedy for jet lag?
Well, I'm afraid I didn't do real well with that because Ann was stationed in Clark and I went over for vacation and we were at a Thai restaurant and there was all this entertainment and I fell asleep bolt upright in the chair. And that's the truth.
Were you an only child?
Oh, good question. I have a sister who's 8 years younger, but we are estranged by her choice. Anybody else? I was firstborn, though.
I saw that,
Yeah. My mom had trouble having babies. She gave birth to me first. 2 years after that, she had a stillborn, unfortunately. 2 years after that, she did carry to term, but ended up aborting them. And then she had my sister.
Gotcha.
My sister has olive complexion, has brown hair, and my mom told everybody that it was daylight and darkness. And it turned out that was right for my sister.
Did you have problem with air sickness?
No. Now, I will qualify that. On a 130, on a hot day, when you're bouncing all around that propeller plane, it's difficult.
Oh, wow.
It's difficult, you know, and you're full of crew. Yeah, it's difficult. Not much ventilation. I wore boots all the time on my 141 because your feet got very cold. And I would tell in the briefing, I would recommend that people wear socks and boots. Yeah. And they're very noisy. I mean, that's why I have hearing aids now. My hearing loss is because of high intensity hearing loss.
God. Amazing.
Anything else? Yeah.
Any other questions?
How did you pick Bluffton?
That's a very good question, too. September before we moved, Ann and I came on vacation, and we rented vacation by owner in Port Royal. And we were very close to the beach, and we had access to the pool and the villas across the street, and the weather was just gorgeous. And at that time, my mom had already died, and I was taking care of my dad, and he was getting to where he couldn't get around as well, and he had kidney failure. And so we decided that we were going to move and bring him down here because he said he would never go to Florida, and I wanted him to be able to be in nice climate for as long as he had to live. And we wanted to live on the island. In fact, we almost bought a place, But our best friend was having a terrible time with allergies because of the mold. And so we ended up buying it in Sun City and living there until we came back to the island.
Any other questions? Do you think she had a full life? Next month we have Ed Warner. Ed Warner lives on Shoreline Drive, is a neighbor of mine. He is a turnaround specialist, corporate turnaround specialist. Go into a company, and 3 years later he would take it from a losing company to a good company and start all over again with another company.
That's wonderful.
That'll be a very interesting
That's
program.
wonderful.
It's April the 11th.
That's wonderful.
Now, we are looking for future speakers. Think about it. If you'd like to speak, please come to see me, because I am running out of speakers. But thank you for coming. I hope you enjoyed it. Again, Pat Ravella.